Now, as we've been discussing, we don't need to tell you that the Epstein scandal has loomed large over British public life in the last year. And we do talk a lot about the men associated with Jeffrey Epstein. Peter Mandelson, the man that we've just been talking about, sacked as US ambassador. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, the former prince, stripped of his titles. Both men are now facing police investigation. Both men vehemently deny any wrongdoing. The people we don't hear from enough, though, are the survivors. The women like Lisa Phillips. This was Lisa Phillips in her early 20s before everything changed. This was her on her way to Jeffrey Epstein's private island. Well, today she is in Westminster with a direct appeal to the Prime Minister and the King for a full public inquiry into a child trafficking network here in the UK. We spent the day with her, watched her go into Parliament to meet with crossbench MPs. We'll play you our full interview in a moment. But first, we wanted to give you a bit of a sense of the mood from Lisa and some of those MPs who are backing her in Westminster today.
I'm here to ask the King and the Prime Minister for a public inquiry in the UK for the global survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. I mean, I used to live in England as a child, so I don't know, coming back here always feels like home a little bit. And just like Big Ben and the power that's here makes me feel really powerful.
So Lisa has been in this meeting for about an hour. We're expecting her to come out any moment now. This has obviously been a long time coming. She's come all the way from the US, and to get this cross-party group of MPs together is really significant. But the big question is, you know, are the politicians at the top of government, is the Prime Minister listening?
Hi
there. Hey Lisa, how was that?
Well, it was a very good meeting.
Yeah.
It's a good first step. So it's important for us just to lay the foundation and get the proper guidance and advice. And I think we're getting there.
There is a chance for a struggling Prime Minister here to actually deliver for women. How about do that for the Epstein victims as much as the grooming gang victims? And let's have less rhetoric, more action. It might do him some good.
It's vital that survivors are supported and enabled in coming forward. We need to see justice, we need to see accountability, we need to see criminal prosecutions where those are warranted, and we need to ensure that the state does not fail victims.
Lisa, thank you so much for talking to us. And I know you've told your story before and it can't be easy to kind of share it again and again. But I guess, first, I think it's really important for people to understand what's brought you here today. So can you just tell us a little bit about how and when you met Jeffrey Epstein?
So I met Jeffrey Epstein, I was in my early 20s, and I was a fashion model in New York City. And I had booked a big job, and I went down to the small island called Tortola. It sits next to Little St. James and St. Thomas, you know, in the Caribbean.
And what happened when you got there? Did you meet him straight away?
No, I was there for a photo shoot, and then another model that was on the shoot had said, you know, I have a friend, he has an island nearby, and we had an extra day, so we just went over there just to hang out for the day for a few hours, and then we were supposed to come back. So this person sent a boat, and we went over to the island, and we just hung out there for the day.
So you went to his private island, and what was your impression of him when you first met him?
Well, I didn't meet him at first. You know, I played in the pool a little bit with some other girls that were there, and then we went for dinner, and then that's when I met him. And my first impression, he was charming and nice and polite, and he came off more like a mentor type of person. That was my initial feeling.
Did you meet any other men there?
Well, I saw a man that was in the pool. He was hanging out with the other young girls there. And then later I was introduced to him as a prince before he left the island.
And you think that was Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor?
Yeah. I didn't put the correlation to that until a couple years later when a girlfriend of mine had mentioned that she had an encounter with a prince. And that's when she showed me like the pictures and stuff. I was like, oh, that's the guy that I met originally on the island.
And we obviously have to say that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor denies any wrongdoing. But what happened later? Things took a turn, right?
Well, yeah, back on the island, later on that evening, I guess it got too late for us to go home, and now I had met Jeffrey Epstein, and he had said, oh, you're not going home, you're going to stay here for the night. And so later on that evening, we were told to do a massage, and the massage turned into a sexual assault.
And that brings you here to Westminster all these years on. You're speaking to politicians. I mean, I guess I firstly kind of want to ask, what do you think you and that girl in your early 20s would have thought now if you'd known you were still fighting now for that girl?
Oh, I would never would have thought that I would be here today. I was never even planning on speaking out. I think it just, one thing happens after the other. Not seeing justice really happen in 2008. And then a group of survivors coming together in 2019 and speaking out. And that's how really it came about, was to support other survivors' stories. And it was a couple years later when I started telling my story of what happened to me. It took a lot of courage to get there to that point, after being deposed for other cases and going through the settlement funds and finding out there was hundreds of other girls. And as a podcast host, I had spoken to many, many of them that were victims of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah, and we obviously really appreciate you speaking to us this evening. Tell us a bit about why you have come to Westminster and what you're hoping to achieve.
Well, my survivor sisters and I at Capitol Hill, we've been fighting for the Transparency Act and to have accountability and awareness of what's going on. And maybe a little bit more than half of the files have been released, and we don't have a full understanding of what's going on. But what I've learned is there's a lot of UK survivors. And I just feel like it was the right thing to do with our powerful quests that we had at Capitol Hill in the United States, to find out and support survivors of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein in the UK. And so I came here today with some allies, Ivana Bocik from Ireland, who's been a big supporter of myself and the survivors, and my team at SPY, the Sexual Predator Accountability Institute. Our team met with some MPs today, and we had a really good meeting. It was productive, and they were helping to give advice and guidance of what our next steps should be here in the UK to push a public inquiry. And that was initially my stance today, was to call to the King and the Prime Minister, about if they're going to support a public inquiry.
Do you think the Prime Minister's listening to you?
Well, I learned today in the meeting that he has the power to have a public inquiry like that, if he wanted to do so. But I also learned that it's a long process, and the advice that the MPs gave me, that gave us, was to reach out to survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, to talk to the victims that are out there. We know that between 4 and 10 have come forward at this time, or actually in the last 10 years, and went to the Metropolitan Police and their own local police stations, and they advised that these survivors should go to their local police. Yeah. But I just think that they've already done that, and they weren't successful. Nothing's come about, that process. And so what I would like to say today is, for survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, or anyone in their orbit, that should feel comfortable and feel safe and protected with myself and my team, to reach out to thespy.org. That's thespy.org, and fill out the form, and we'll be in contact with them.
So this is about people feeling able to come forward. Would you like to meet with the Prime Minister?
Absolutely, yes. I think myself and survivors, we have a lot of U.S. survivors that can support this, but what we really need to speak to the Prime Minister is UK survivors. We're talking about the criminal activity that happened in the UK, whether it happened here or they were trafficked out of here. It's really important to have British survivors.
The Prime Minister's apologised before, in particular around the appointment of Peter Mandelson. What did you think of his apology as a survivor?
Well, he did apologize, and we thank him for that apology. But we need to take it one step further, and there needs to be an awareness and accountability. And I think the British people really deserve, just like the American people deserve, and that we've fought for so much over the last 9 months. I think that something similar needs to happen in the UK, and I think the UK is more empathetic to survivors of sexual assault, and I feel like the people really want to see justice with the Epstein with the Epstein case.
So it sounds like, today is a step, but there is still so much more that needs to be done in this country.
Well, there's a lot more, yeah, and the awareness of, what's going on. And I know in your country you've had issues like this in the past, and you've been very successful at holding, people accountable. And I think when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein and his global sex trafficking ring, and Ghislaine Maxwell has been held accountable in the United States, but what about when her term is up? She hasn't been held accountable in the UK. And so that's really important to survivors. They've always told me for the last couple years that Ghislaine Maxwell is the most important to them because they feel like she was the ringleader of all of it.
Are there any politicians you feel have really listened to you?
MP Edward Davey has been phenomenal with speaking out in support of Epstein survivors. He actually is the only one that I know of that's spoken out on Parliament.
And would you like that from the Prime Minister?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's what
you're fighting for, right?
I think that's what we're fighting for, yes.
I also want to ask you about the King's visit to the US. Mm-hmm. He's not going to be meeting with survivors. What did you make of that decision?
Those are my survivor sisters that were calling for that meeting with the King. I just decided to come straight over here and speak to the MPs about that and maybe go about it in a different way, because my heart is always here with. In the UK, I spent since I was 2 months old here, my first 5 years of life here, and it always feels like I'm coming home. I grew up half my life in Europe, and so for me, I am very well aware of the European girls and Eastern European girls that were trafficked from here to the United States and abroad. So I still always want to stand up for survivors, and I'm always speaking to them when I talk.
If the King did meet with survivors, what do you think their message would be, and what would your message be?
Support. I think they should support survivors, no matter what that means, whether it's a public inquiry or helping to bring whoever needs to be brought to justice, that they support that.
And lastly, if you had a direct message right now for the Prime Minister and the King, what would it be?
I would say to support a public inquiry. I think that's the most important thing. I know that's not a popular opinion amongst a lot of people in Parliament, but I think it's the most necessary thing to do, is to do what's right for the victims of these horrific crimes. And we do need a public inquiry to start.
Thank you so much. Lisa Phillips there, a survivor of Jeffrey Epstein, calling on the government to start a public inquiry. And we should be clear, I should say, that Lisa is not accusing Andrew Mountbatten Windsor of assaulting her on Epstein's island.